Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller whose famous battle cry is, "Not in the face!" It's not the most intimidating option, to be honest. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and welcome to a discussion of the new Battlecry class playtest that was released Monday by Paizo for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. For those of you who are unaware, Paizo has released another public playtest, the Battlecry playtest, in which they have shared two classes that are going to be released for Pathfinder 2nd Edition next year, the Commander and the Guardian, and they are giving the community an opportunity to test these classes out and give them some feedback to help make the final version of these classes as excellent as they can possibly be. To that effect, there is a public Battlecry playtest document, which you can see on the screen right now, and there is an official survey for this playtest, as well as some threads on the Paizo forums talking about these classes, which are some of the different ways that you can give feedback for the Commander and the Guardian. So, this is an excellent opportunity for you to get involved and help shape the future of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. All of the relevant links to the Battlecry playtest will be found in the video description, so if you jump down to the video description, you can find this playtest document that we're taking a look at today, and a link to some of the other sources that you may want to check out if you want to participate in this. But the format for this playtest runs very similar to what we've come to expect from Paizo. Essentially, they are giving us just a little under 2 months to take these classes, play them in our home games, and then turn around and give Paizo some feedback about what we think about these classes and whether or not we think that these classes are moving in the right direction. The playtest will run until June 21st, 2024, so as I mentioned a moment ago, you've got a little under 2 months to try these classes out. And as with any playtest that Paizo does, it's important to note that they are focusing their attention on feedback from actual play. Anyone and everyone is welcome to download the playtest document, take a look at these classes, and offer our comments and criticism regarding what we see, but the best possible feedback that Paizo can get comes in the form of actual play. So, in your home game, your online game, wherever it may be that you play Pathfinder 2nd Edition, if you can drop one of these two classes into the game, even briefly, and run them for a few sessions, that's going to give you an opportunity to give very practical, focused, and useful feedback to Paizo about these classes and what they can adjust to ultimately make these classes the best fit for the game. Now, one of the really cool things about Paizo is, over the years, they have shown that they take playtest feedback very seriously from their community, and we'll get into this a bit in this video, but I feel like this particular playtest has been dropped to the public a little bit earlier in the developmental cycle, which means that I really believe that the Pathfinder 2e community has a really fantastic opportunity to influence the direction of these classes and the game at large, so this is definitely a fantastic opportunity. For those of you who may be curious, Paizo notes in the playtest document that an upcoming sourcebook, which may be called Battlecry, I'm assuming that's the case here, but I don't know that for sure. There is a sourcebook scheduled for release in Gen Con 2025, so well over a year away, that is going to focus on bringing gritty combat to your gaming tables. The first new class that is going to be offered in this playtest is called the Commander, and they are a battlefield leader. It notes in the description that they make clever use of tactics in order to turn the tide of battle. The other class that is being playtested is known as the Guardian, and it is described as a defensive combatant who focuses on squeezing every last drop of protection out of their armor to the benefit of both themselves and their allies. And while I realize that defensive-oriented characters may not sound particularly compelling, I will note that Paizo has given us a very huge draw for the Guardian class, with the inclusion of a taunt mechanic specific to this class, which is something that I know a lot of Pathfinder 2e players have been interested in and asking for quite some time. In fact, mechanically speaking, the Commander and the Guardian represent two of the larger requests for Pathfinder 2e that I have seen in the community at large, and it seems that Paizo is stepping to fill a desired gap in play options that a lot of people have identified. So all in all, I'm pretty excited about this playtest. I think it shows that Paizo is paying attention to their community, and they've got a pretty good grasp on the things that the community wants for the benefit of the game. Now, all of that being said, I don't want to give you the impression that I am looking at this playtest through rose-colored glasses. I do have some concerns for what I'm seeing from Paizo, most notably for these two playtest classes, that they both seem to fill a niche that already has some pretty good representation in Pathfinder 2e. We'll get into this a bit more here in a minute, but I'll go ahead and say that in some ways the Commander feels like it may be stepping on the toes of the Bard a little bit, and the Guardian definitely feels like it's going to be competing for play space with the Champion class. So if I'm being entirely honest, I do have some concerns as to whether or not these classes can effectively distinguish themselves from options already inside the game. But at the very least, I think Paizo is presenting some strong opening ideas for these classes, and I am interested to see where this conversation goes. I will go ahead and tell you, I'm recording this video Monday night, so the same day that this playtest went live, and basically I read through this playtest document while I was on my lunch break at work. So my overall grasp of both of these playtest classes is very preliminary at the moment. I don't know for sure if I'm going to get to playtest either of these classes personally myself. If I do get a chance to do some at the gaming table playtesting, I will definitely come back and do a follow-up video on this playtest. But do be aware as you are watching this video that a lot of the thoughts I am offering here are very much my early reactions, my initial thoughts, before I've had a chance to dive all the way in depth. Another quick note about this video, I'm not going to be looking at every single option that is presented in this playtest. I'm going to be looking at some of the key ideas, some of the big mechanical offerings that these classes have, but I'm not going to go into every single specific thing. The reality is, I think the conversation is better served by talking about how these ideas are going to influence the game. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Up first, we have the Commander class, and I just want to note really quick, on this playtest document, there is no sketch art of any upcoming iconic character. There are a couple of pieces of artwork in this document. Here we have what appears to be a Dwarven Commander, and if you were to jump down to the Guardian class, you will actually find some artwork of Irabeth from Wrath of the Righteous. And according to some of the conversations I've seen, apparently a Paizo developer has said both of these pieces of artwork are placeholder art. They do not reflect the iconic characters that will stand in for these classes in future publications. When I first saw these pieces of artwork, I wondered if Irabeth was going to become an iconic character for Paizo, but that doesn't seem to be what they are doing. This artwork, as far as I can tell, is placeholder artwork, all of which means we don't really have any information on the characters that are ultimately going to portray these classes, and given the fact that we do not have any information about the upcoming iconic characters for these classes, that really leads me to believe that what we are seeing in this playtest is, compared to other playtests, a early in the developmental cycle offering that has been given to us. I know that's a bit of a nitpicky thing, but honestly, the lack of any clues about the iconic characters does really stand out to me in this document, and that does cause me to believe that this document is probably pretty early in the development history, which could say some interesting things about changes that are happening at Paizo, but honestly, I've chased this rabbit too far already. Let's step back and talk about what the Commander is. The Commander is an intelligence-based martial class with the following description. You approach battle with the knowledge that tactics and strategy are every bit as crucial as brute strength and numbers. You may have trained in classical theories of warfare and strategy at a military school, or you might have refined your techniques through hard-won experience as part of an army or mercenary company. Regardless of how you came by your knowledge, you have a gift for signaling your allies from across the battlefield and shouting commands to rout even the most desperate conflicts, allowing your squad to exceed their limits and claim victory. That's a pretty cool description, and if I were to offer my description of the Commander, at least from my first read-through, I would say that the Commander is what happens when the Starfinder Envoy, the Pathfinder 1st Edition Cavalier, and the Wizard all have a baby together and make a new class. I think you'll see what I mean by that here in a minute. As previously mentioned, this is going to be an intelligence-based class, and even though it is a martial class, it has 8 plus Constitution modifier hit points per level, which is more on par with a class like the Rogue than a class like the Fighter, giving you the idea that the Commander is not intended to mix it up with monsters by themselves, but I think that's obvious from the name of the class. We have the usual class sidebar that gives us our initial proficiencies. The Commander is going to start with Expert Proficiency in Perception. They're going to be trained in Fortitude saves, Expert in Reflex and Will. They're going to begin the game trained in Society and Warfare lore, and they get a number of additional skills equal to 2 plus their Intelligence modifier. They're going to be trained in simple and martial weapons as well as unarmed attacks, and for defenses, they're going to be trained in all armors as well as unarmored defense, and they will also be trained in their class DC. Looking at this base package for the Commander, there are not a lot of things that necessarily jump out. Starting at Expert in Perception is a little bit interesting to me, especially given some of the class abilities we're going to talk about. The base number of skills known is low, but bear in mind this is an intelligence-based class, so your intelligence is naturally going to be higher, meaning the Commander is ultimately going to start with a pretty healthy number of skills. Not counting lore skills, your typical Commander is probably going to begin the game trained in at least half of the skills in the game, if not a little better, once you account for background and ancestry options and things like that. Really, the main thing that you want to note in looking at these initial proficiencies is this special lore skill called Warfare Lore that is called out by this sidebar, because the Warfare Lore skill is going to be a critical lore skill for this class. Kind of like Esoteric Lore is for the Thaumaturge, Warfare Lore is a very important skill for the Commander. Moving down, we get the Commander advancement table, but honestly, we're just going to skip straight to the class features. You have things like Ancestry, Background, Attribute Boost, things that you are very familiar with, but the first key ability that is described is called Commander's Banner. Every Commander needs a battle standard that their allies can use to locate them on the battlefield, and you start play with a custom banner that you use to signal your allies when using your tactics abilities, which we will discuss here in a moment. It specifically notes that this banner can be affixed to a weapon or a shield, or you can simply hold it in one hand or attach it to something like a pole. Each of these represent different ways that you can present and use your banner, and then other feats or abilities that the Commander class offers can further expand these options. The core benefit of your banner is, as long as your banner is visible, you and all allies within 30 feet gain a +1 status bonus on will saves and DCs against fear effects. Basically, as long as everyone can see your banner, they are less likely to flee the battlefield. However, there is also a downside to this ability. If your banner is destroyed or stolen, allies within 30 feet become frightened 1. So right out of the gate, the Commander comes with this really nice area of effect buff to them and their allies that they can pretty easily use, and Paizo has been pretty generous in finding multiple ways to use this banner. So it's a pretty nice and flexible buff that is readily available to you and your allies, but it also has a really obvious target put on it. If your enemies can get a hold of this banner or destroy this banner, then it's automatically going to debuff your allies instead. So allow me to say, I actually think the design of the Commander's Banner ability is pretty cool just right from the get-go because of this powerful effect that you can drop whenever and wherever you want, but also the knowledge that when you use this ability, you are potentially exposing you and your allies to an additional level of risk if that banner can be accessed by your enemies. The last paragraph down here simply notes that you might find some alternate ways to use your banner. Any benefit from this ability is going to emanate from where your banner is, not where you are. But honestly, that particular rule is pretty intuitive, so I don't think that part of the ability is going to be particularly challenging. The next major ability for the commander is called Tactics. By studying and practicing the strategic arts of war, you can guide your allies to victory. You begin play with a folio containing 4 tactics from the list on pages 6 through 7. We'll look at that here in a moment. These are combat techniques and coordinated maneuvers you can instruct your allies in, enabling them to respond to your signals in combat. As you increase in level, you gain the ability to learn more potent tactics. So when you get Expert Tactician, you can use Expert Tactics, Master Tactician gives you Master Tactics, and Legendary Tactician gives you Legendary Tactics. All of that is pretty self-explanatory. The really important part here is each day during your daily preparations, you prepare 2 tactics from your folio and drill them alongside your allies, allowing you and your allies to access those tactics during the day. When you drill, you can instruct a total number of allies equal to 2 plus your intelligence modifier. So assuming you start with a +3 or +4, that means that you're going to be able to drill these tactics with 5 or 6 of your allies. So this ability is designed to work alongside your typical adventuring party pretty well. The allies that you train alongside are referred to as squad mates, and it specifically notes that a squad mate always has the option not to respond to your tactical signals if they do not wish to do so. In other words, as a commander, you can issue orders, and those orders can be a benefit to your allies, but it's not a way of controlling every single thing that your ally does, and I do think it's important that Paizo put that in here. One small concern that you have for classes like the commander is that style of role player who thinks it's their job to tell everyone else at the table what they're supposed to be doing. I like the fact that Paizo put that line in here as a way of stating these abilities are to help your team, not boss your team around and make them do what you want them to do. You can change the tactics that you have prepared by drilling for 10 minutes, effectively making this an exploration activity that the commander can use. And it also gives us a little bit of information about gaining new tactics. While your tactics are written down in a folio that feels like it should be similar to a spell book, they specifically note that you add additional tactics to your folio through specific class features. There is a class feat called Tactical Expansion that can also give you additional tactics, but there is a definite upper limit to how many tactics that your commander is going to be able to access through their folio. However, all that being said, it is completely legitimate for a commander to retrain the tactics that are in their folio. So, for example, if you spend some time studying with a different commander, you may be able to switch out one tactic that's in your folio for another tactic, and then you could prepare that tactic with your team at the start of a new day. The next ability that you get is called Drilled Reaction, and what this does is, once per round, when you use a tactic, you can grant one ally of your choice, benefiting from that tactic, an extra reaction, but the extra reaction must be used for that tactic. It can't be used for anything else, and if it's not used, it's lost. Now, we'll get to this a bit more when we talk about the tactics, but I feel like Paizo stuck this ability in as a way of not making your abilities a tax on other players' reactions. It would really stink, for example, for the fighter to have to give up their reactive strike in order to benefit from the tactics ability that your character is employing. So, with drilled reactions, you can give your fighter an extra reaction to go with the tactic, and then they still have their normal reaction for the reactive strike that they could already use. Additionally, the commander is going to have access to the Shield Block General feat, much like many other martial classes have access to, and it's going to function exactly like Shield Block normally functions. Before we dive into the other major class abilities, I do want to stop and take a look at the key term sidebar that is included for the commander. When I do my large class reviews, I always take time to look at the key terms because understanding key terms often helps you understand how a class is supposed to function. The first key term is called Tactic. Tactics are special abilities that involve signaling your allies to perform predetermined maneuvers. To use a tactic ability, you must have one or more willing allies that you have instructed beforehand during your daily preparations. Your squad mates must also be able to perceive your signal, and that signal can be auditory or visual depending on how you give the signal. And it specifically notes that while you can use multiple tactic actions in a round, a character cannot respond to more than one tactic per round, regardless of the source. I think the reason that tactic is written this way is some tactic abilities might be more useful for, say, a melee character like a fighter or barbarian, while other tactic options may be more useful for ranged characters or mages or something to that effect. So I think they wrote the tactic ability this way so that if you choose on your round, you could issue 2 commands, and then the fighter in your party could go with the command that matches their combat style the best, and the mage can instead respond to the one that is more befitting of their combat style. The long and short is, as a commander, you're not limited in the number of tactics you can use, but your allies, or squad mates, can only benefit from one option that you throw out, regardless of how many you offer. The next trait is called Banner, and this basically means that in order to use an ability, you must be displaying your banner. You can be holding it, it can be affixed to your weapon, or you can be displaying it through some other option that you have available through your class. But essentially, that special banner that you have must be out as a prerequisite to whatever the ability is. The next trait is one that we've seen on a lot of classes, and that is the Flourish trait. Flourish essentially means once per round, so anytime you see Flourish, know that you can only use that ability one time in a round, and if you have multiple abilities with the Flourish trait, they are mutually exclusive with each other, meaning you can only use one Flourish ability regardless of how many you have in a given round. The final key term is called Squad Mate, and this is used to designate which allies you have prepared your tactics ability with for the day, and only you and your squad mates can benefit from your tactics. Now, one thing I want to note here is it's not super clear if all of the commander abilities are intended to be the commander and their allies, or just the commander's allies. Sometimes the wording seems to imply one, but sometimes the wording seems to imply the other. Right now, I would advise when you're looking at commander abilities, operate under the assumption that any ability affects your allies only, unless it specifically notes that it also affects the commander as well. Paizo may clarify this down the road, or I may discover that I'm just misreading some things, but right now it seems like a lot of commander abilities are specifically for their allies, and then sometimes the commander also gets the benefit. In terms of other things that the commander gets for leveling up, you have things like skill feats, general feats, skill increases. These function exactly how you expect them to. One of the major abilities that you're going to run into is at 3rd level, you get Warfare Expertise. This will automatically give you expert proficiency in Warfare lore, and you can use Warfare lore to recall knowledge about most creatures regardless of their type, but you can only use recall knowledge in order to determine if the creatures can be reasoned with, what offensive abilities they might have, or whether or not one of their saving throws is particularly weak. The GM can decide that other questions may be appropriate, but essentially it is a limited version of recall knowledge that can potentially be used against almost any creature. The other major benefit of Warfare Expertise, and arguably the more important benefit, is as long as you are observing at least one opponent when initiative is rolled, you can choose to roll Warfare lore for your initiative. If you can't tell, this is a class that is going to end up with legendary proficiency in Warfare lore, and Warfare lore is going to go off your intelligence, which is your core stat. So the commander is intended to be a class that, as long as you're not being ambushed, is probably going to get to go early in the initiative order. Military expertise is one of those class features that just gives you better use of weapons. But up next you have Expert Tactician, which is going to be closer to the core identity of the class. This is going to increase the proficiency rank for your class DC, and allow you to add a new tactic to your folio. Additionally, the number of tactics you can have prepared each day is going to increase to 3, and then finally, your proficiency rank in Warfare lore is going to increase to Master. You get weapon specialization, fortitude expertise, armor expertise. All of these track with fairly standard class abilities we're used to in this game. And then at level 11, you'll get Commanding Will, which is your boost to will saving throws. You get Master Perception at 13th level, and Master Proficiency with weapons as well. Battlefield Intuition at 15th level is going to give you better reflex saves, and you also get greater weapon specialization. But the real gem at 15th level is your Master Tactician ability. This is going to increase your Commander class DC again, it's going to give you another tactic to add to your folio, and it's going to increase the number of tactics you can have prepared each day to a maximum of 4. In addition, your Warfare lore is going to reach Legendary Proficiency. Armor Mastery is going to kick in at 17th level, and then at 19th level, you're going to get Legendary Tactician, which is going to increase your Commander DC all the way up to Legendary, add an additional tactic to your folio, and increase the maximum number of tactics you can have prepared up to 5. So that is an overview of the abilities that the Commander is going to give you. Now let's take a look at some of the tactics, not all of them, but some of them, just to give you an idea of the options that this class has access to. Generally speaking, your tactics can be divided into mobility tactics, which affects how your squad moves around the battlefield, or offensive tactics, which reflects how your squad attacks, repositions, or resists enemy forces. If I'm being honest, offensive tactics actually covers a lot of different things, and it might help clarify future versions of this class if they have mobility, offensive, and defensive tactics, because a lot of things get mixed into offensive, but for now you have mobility and offensive as your two major categories. And one of the things you're going to want to pay attention to as you look at these tactics is you're going to want to watch for the banner trait that some, but not necessarily all, of the tactics have. For example, Defensive Retreat is a 2-action tactic. You call for a careful retreat. Signal all squad mates who can hear or see your signal. Each can immediately step up to 3 times as a free action. Each step must take them further away from at least one hostile creature that they are observing, and can only take them closer to a hostile creature if doing so is the only way for them to move towards safety, such as if they are surrounded. Defensive Retreat basically gives your squad an opportunity to reposition themselves where they are in less danger, but in order to use Defensive Retreat, you have to have your banner out. Not necessarily every tactic has this requirement. For example, Mountaineering Training doesn't have the banner trait, but you're going to want to watch your tactics closely to see whether or not your banner is required in order for the tactic to be used. For an example of an offensive tactic, we have Coordinating Maneuvers. This is a single action tactic. Your team works to slip enemies into a disadvantageous position. Signal one squad mate currently affected by your banner. That ally can immediately step as a free action, and if they end their movement next to an opponent, they can attempt to reposition that target as a reaction. This is a pretty common formula for a lot of these tactics. You will spend 1 or 2 actions to give 1 or 2 of your allies a free action of some kind, and then usually there's some kind of special reaction that can get tagged onto it if they meet certain conditions. Now, I don't want to read every single tactic because we still have an entire second class to do, but as an example of an expert tactic, you have Stupefying Raid. It is a 2-action tactic with the banner trait. Your team dashes about in a series of maneuvers that leave the enemy befuddled. Signal up to 2 squad mates affected by your banner. These allies can stride up to their speed as a reaction. Each enemy that they are adjacent to at any point during the movement must attempt a will save against your class DC or become Stupefied 1 for 1 round, or Stupefied 2 on a critical failure. As for a potential master tactic, we have Ready, Aim, Fire, a 2-action tactic. You signal a volley of ranged attack from your allies, signal all squad mates affected by your banner. They can interact to swap a ranged weapon as a free action, interact to reload as a free action, and then attempt a ranged strike against an enemy that both you and they can see as a reaction. And as a special note on this tactic, yes, a spellcaster can use a cantrip with this ability instead of the normal swap a weapon and reload, meaning this is one of the few occasions inside the game where a spellcaster can actually use a spell as a reaction. Not bad. If you want the legendary version, you have Executioner's Volley, which is a 2-action tactic usable once every 10 minutes, so essentially once per battle, that can allow you and each of your squad mates to focus fire on a single enemy and combine the damage from all of your attacks for the purpose of determining resistance and weaknesses. Additionally, these attacks are death effects and they gain the death trait, and if you actually kill the target, all other enemies that are affected by your banner have to make a will save or be frightened. So that is a really quick glance at the Commander class. We actually haven't had time to look at any of the class feats for the Commander, but there's definitely a lot of fun stuff you can check out if you download the playtest document. Let's go ahead and move on to the Guardian. The Guardian is described as follows. You are the shield, the steel wall that holds back the tide of deadly force exhibited by enemies great and small. You are clad in armor that you wear like a second skin. You can angle your armor to protect yourself and your allies from damage and keep foes at bay. You also make yourself more tempting to target to take hits that might have otherwise struck down your companions. The Guardian is, very obviously, a defense-oriented martial class. You wear heavy armor and you are designed to take heavy hits so your allies don't have to. Your key attribute is strength, and you have the fairly standard 10 plus con modifier hit points at every level. If the initial proficiencies for the Commander didn't stand out very much, the initial proficiencies for the Guardian are equally kinda normal. You are trained in Perception. For your saving throws, you're going to be expert in Fortitude and Will, but only trained in Reflex. And then for skills, you're going to be trained in Athletics, and a number of additional skills equal to 3 plus your Intelligence modifier. The base here may be a little bit better than the Commander, but remember the Commander is an intelligence-based class, so when it comes to number of trained skills, the Commander is definitely the class that's going to win out here. As for attacks and armor, this is very predictable. Trained in simple and martial weapons and unarmed attacks, trained in unarmored defense and all armors. You're also going to be trained in your Guardian class DC. All of this is very predictable stuff. Really, the initial proficiencies are not the selling point of the class. The selling point of the class is this sidebar right here, which says Resistance Reminder. A Guardian's armor allows them to resist damage in several specific ways. From armor specialization to the intercept strike action, remember that if you have more than one type of resistance that would apply to the same instance of damage, you only use the highest applicable resistance value. Okay, I was joking a little bit. Sidebars are not your selling point, but this sidebar points out the selling point of this class, which is you come with a ton of defensive options. Now yes, you have ancestry and background, attribute boosts, initial proficiencies, you're going to have the skill increases, skill feats, all that stuff is going to be in there. But the major benefit of this class is the multiple defensive options that you have access to. Up first is Guardian Armor. You gain armor specialization for medium and heavy armor at first level. This is a unique ability to the class, and it is a passive defense that's just always on as long as you are wearing your armor. That's honestly pretty cool. You also have a unique reaction for the class, which is the Intercept Strike reaction. The trigger is if an adjacent ally would take physical damage, You fling yourself in the way of the oncoming harm in order to protect that ally, and you take the damage instead of them. In so doing, your armor actually helps you absorb the incoming blow, and you gain resistance to all damage against the triggering damage equal to 2 plus your level. So you not only protect your ally from a dangerous blow that they might have taken, but you also reduce some of that incoming damage, meaning less overall damage to your actual party. This is a pretty awesome defensive reaction, and if you like playing the defender, this is something that's going to get some mileage. You also have the shield block ability, meaning you can intercept damage that's coming straight towards you, meaning that between Guardian Armor, Intercept Strike, and Shield Block, every first level Guardian is going to have 3 different damage mitigation options, 1 passive, 2 active, that they have access to at all times. This is a lot of defensive options crammed into a first level character, and we haven't even gotten to the best part of the class. The best part, of course, is the new Taunt ability. This is a single action activity where you get the attention of a particular creature. By the way, they note, even mindless creatures are drawn to your taunts. So this is an ability that is going to be almost universally usable. You target a creature that is within 30 feet of you, and they must attempt a will save against your class DC. Regardless of the result, they are immune to any further uses of Taunt this particular round, and the traits of the Taunt ability can vary depending on if you say something or make some kind of gesture. It might have the auditory or visual trait, but it must always have at least one of those 2. If the creature gets a critical success on their will save, they are unaffected by your Taunt, but on any other roll, they will be affected at least partially. You can kind of divide this effect into 2 parts. The first part is, because you have gotten the creature's attention, that creature is going to get a +2 circumstance bonus on attack rolls that it makes against you, and the DC of any effect that it uses against you. By the way, that is specifically you. That +2 bonus doesn't apply to anyone else. You have taunted the creature, you have made it mad, it is coming for you. However, that creature also takes a -1 circumstance penalty on attack rolls and DCs that target any other creature that is not you. So when you taunt, even if the creature is successful on its saving throw, you have gotten its attention, and it gains bonuses to come after you and penalties if it tries to target anyone else. On a failure, the penalties increase from -1 to -2, and should it roll a critical failure, the penalties increase all the way up to a -3. In other words, the bonus to come after you is always going to be the same, but the worse the creature rolls, the bigger their penalties become if they try to target somebody other than you. Honestly, the Taunt ability is something that people have been begging for in Pathfinder 2e for a while now, and at least on first glance, I think this is pretty well constructed. It doesn't strip agency away from players or game masters, but it has a very clear mechanical effect that influences how creatures are going to act. I think Taunt is pretty well designed. The only concern I have, I wonder if Taunt is going to make the future Guardian multi-class archetype an auto-pick for any Defender-style character. This ability is really, really good, and I could see a lot of classes like the Champion wanting to dip their toes into Guardian just so they can pick this up. I'm definitely glad that this ability is here, but I do worry that Paizo has created a best-in-slot ability for a Defender-style character that could be contorting future builds once this class goes live. However, we're not done with the first level Guardian yet, because you also have an additional ability called a Threat Technique. Essentially, this is a choice that you get to make at first level that determines an additional benefit that comes when you use the Taunt ability. One is called Ferocious Vengeance, and the other is called Mitigate Harm. I want to talk about Mitigate Harm first. One of the obvious downsides of the Taunt ability is enemies are going to be getting a +2 circumstance bonus to come after you. Now that bonus does make sense, but it also means that enemies are more likely to land a critical hit against you, which is a very risky thing. However, you do have the option of the mitigate harm threat technique, which is essentially damage resistance specifically against critical hits. In other words, you're saying, yes, I know I'm exposing myself to extra danger, but I'm also braced to absorb the terrible hits that might be coming my way. It's fairly passive, and it offsets one of the major downsides of the Taunt ability, so if you want to make sure that your character is going to survive all of the aggro that's coming your way, I think mitigating harm is pretty good. However, there is a bit of a problem with mitigate harm in that by making yourself more resistant to damage, something that you already do really well, you're kind of playing against the purpose of Taunt. The whole purpose of Taunt is to give your enemies a reason to come for you, and making yourself harder to kill means that enemies might decide they would still rather go after your allies. That's where the Ferocious Vengeance ability comes in. Enemies that ignore your taunts take the brunt of your anger. You deal 2 additional damage on strikes against creatures affected by your taunt if they take a hostile action that doesn't include you as a target. As you level up, this damage is going to increase. Ferocious Vengeance makes your taunt much more dangerous. If the enemy ignores you, you get bonus damage against them, and you are a strength-based martial class, they probably don't want you hitting any harder. This is an interesting choice that Paizo poses. In using the Taunt ability, do you really want to make enemies come for you, or do you want to give yourself better odds of survival when the enemies come for you? I'm curious to see how this plays out at people's gaming tables, but I can see the appeal of both of the options here. Leveling up the Guardian is fairly straightforward. You have skill feats, general feats, skill increases. All of these are fairly standard. I really like the Tough to Kill ability at 3rd level. You gain the Die Hard general feat, and if you already had Die Hard, you can retrain the previous version, and the first time each day that you'd be reduced to dying 3, you stay at dying 2 instead. Now, honestly, this is probably not going to come up a lot, but in particularly pitched battles, this is an ability you'll probably be grateful you have. You have Ancestry feats, and then at 5th level you also pick up Armor Expertise, which is going to give you Expert proficiency in medium and heavy armor. Reflex saves go to Expert as well. At 7th level you get an ability called Reaction Time, which increases your perception to Expert, and when you roll initiative you gain a reaction that you can only use for Guardian feats or class features. So there is a small nuance to Pathfinder 2nd Edition rules that reactions are granted at the start of your turn in combat, so when you roll initiative, you do not automatically have a reaction. Now, it's often up to Game Master Fiat whether or not you can use a reaction at the start of combat, but very clearly for the Guardian, when you roll initiative, you gain access to a reaction. You have one for sure. You are used to responding at the drop of a hat. You'll get Weapon Expertise, and at 9th level you have Battle Hardened, which is Master Proficiency in Fortitude saves. Your Guardian class CC also increases at 9th level. At 11th level you'll get Master Proficiency with Armor, and you'll also gain Weapon Specialization. And at 13th level you get an ability that I missed when I was reading this class earlier. It's called Greater Armor Specialization. Double the value of your armor's potency rune when calculating the resistance that you gain from armor specialization. I'm going to admit I didn't even realize this was a thing until right now. I'm going to have to go look this up later and decide how much I like this ability, but at the very least it's caught my curiosity. 15th level will give you Legendary Proficiency in Armor, as well as Master Proficiency in Will saves. You get Greater Weapon Specialization at 17th level, and at 17th level you also get Master Proficiency with Weapons. At 19th level, you're going to get an ability called Guardian Mastery, which increases your Guardian class CC to Master, and when you attempt a reflex save to avoid a damaging effect, so for example Fireball, you add your armor's item bonus to AC instead of your dexterity modifier. If you get a success when you do this, treat it as a critical success instead. This is an interesting take on the evasion-like abilities that some classes have. I'm trying to think whether or not I think this will actually be good, but at the very least, it's a fun take on it. As for key terms, I know I bypassed this sidebar earlier. The Guardian is going to come with 2 key terms that we have seen with other classes before. We've already talked about the Flourish trait, and the other one worth noting is the Stance trait, which is a general combat strategy that you enter by taking an action, and as long as you meet the prerequisites of the stance, you gain certain benefits that last until the encounter ends. All in all, between these 2 classes, the Guardian is definitely the simpler class, but I definitely think it's going to be effective. I have seen some really effective Defender champions in Pathfinder 2e, and even on a casual read-through, I can tell that the Guardian has some pretty significant defensive upgrades over the champion. So I definitely think this class is going to be that functional bodyguard, that functional brick wall that protects their allies. I will say I worry about the Guardian's ability to distinguish itself from the champion. The champion is already very effective as a defender class, and I worry that a class that's leaning even harder into that role is going to kind of vanish in the champion's shadow. For example, one of the early questions that's already occurring to me is, would you be better off playing a champion who just multi-class archetypes into Guardian, gains Taunt, and then goes back to all of the fun champion abilities? Hopefully with playtesting and some additional reading, I'll see how the Guardian manages to distinguish itself, but that is an early concern for me. Still, with all that being said, that is a quick introduction to both of the new playtest classes that Paizo has offered. Next year, the Commander and the Guardian will both be added as options that players can use, and Paizo is very clearly targeting some of the mechanical niches that players have been saying that they want to see. So on a mechanical level, I do think that Paizo has some interesting stuff here. I'm curious to see how it all develops, but this is definitely a good start. Still, the time has come to turn the conversation over to you. What do you think about the Battlecry class playtest? Do you like the Commander and the Guardian, or do you have some concerns about them? And if you get a chance to actually play them at your table, how did that experience go? Let me know what you think, and definitely make sure you go over to the survey that Paizo has put out, because they want to know what you think as well. It's definitely exciting to see some of the things that Paizo is bringing into the game, and I'm excited to hear your take on this playtest. Don't forget to do all of that other stuff that helps to support the channel. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can check out my free Discord and my Patreon. All of that is linked in the video description down below. And as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.